Hey there, welcome back to Move with Joe. In today's lesson, we are talking about neck pain, tension, and discomfort, and most importantly, what you can do to stop the habits that are creating this discomfort for you. Or better yet, stop it before it even starts. So let's dive in. So the first one is something that we're probably all very familiar with, and that is a lack of clear skeletal support, and using the phone would be a great example of how people do this. So if you're standing at the bus stop or waiting on a coffee break and you're scrolling through your phone and you're holding your phone down by your waist, you're creating a significant bend in your neck. And so you can imagine the average person's head is the weight of a bowling ball, and that's on top of a long 24 vertebra spine. So if you have a bowling ball hanging off of its base of support, now you're creating a lot more tension and stiffness that the muscles have to deal with, whereas if you had a clear skeletal support, everything was stacked on top of itself. The head and neck was stacked on the rib cage, which stacked on the pelvis, which stacked on the legs. Then you're not having to deal with the same lack of skeletal support, which is going to create less tension and discomfort in the long run. All right, the next common thing that people do that creates pain are incongruent movement patterns. So for example, I had a client come in, he has a C6, C7 disc bulge, so lots of pain, particularly with different types of movements. And so we started discussing which movements flared him up. And so he said one of the biggest things was going to pick something off the ground. And so I had him demo it for me. And what he would do is he would round his thoracic spine, round the low back, he'd go to pick something up, and then at the very end, he'd pull his head up into extension to look at what he was doing. So this is an incongruent pattern where the upper body was going into flexion, the upper thoracic spine was going into flexion, and then his head was going into extension. And so it was creating this shearing point and compressive forces right where he has the disc bulge. So we simply just spent some time looking at different strategies for him to use to pick up the object from the floor with a different methodology. So, and most importantly, keeping the parts all working in the same direction. So he could simply lunge down and fold from the hips and keep the head and the thoracic spine moving in the same direction. So if he did use a little flexion, just keep the head flexed and go down to pick it up versus taking the head up into extension. So those are incongruent patterns. The next thing is movement patterns where you move in isolation. And this is also a very common thing that causes pain for people. So a great example of this is if you need to turn to look over your shoulder, you just move as if you had a head and neck and you don't move anything else with it. And so, oh yeah, when I turn to there, I get some discomfort here. Well, a simple strategy would be to start to integrate the movement more through the whole of your body. So as you're rotating, you could even imagine beginning to rotate with your feet. So if you're rotating to the right, you begin to lift the inside arch of the right foot and start to move the pelvis, you start to move the spine, and now I can look way farther. I'm more functional, I'm more integrated in my movement, and I'm not putting the same stress as if I were just trying to look with my neck. Okay, so the next one is stress, and in particular with the neck, paying attention to holding stress in the shoulders and the upper trapezius area, extensors of the neck. And so oftentimes at work, if you're working on a deadline, you're typing away, you can start to feel those shoulders starting to creep up and start to crowd the neck. That's going to create a lot of strain and tension. So a couple easy ways is just shaking out the shoulders, trying to get them to relax, letting go. You could even hang on to some weights and just do a passive hold of the weights and then have a sense of shaking them out afterwards. So those are a couple strategies for dealing with stress. Of course, getting up, taking breaks, moving, and just trying to let go of any of that held tension that accumulates from a stressful workday. Okay, so the next thing are workplace ergonomics. And ideally, you want your setup, whether you're at a standing desk or a seated desk, you want your monitor at eye height, and you want your keypad and your mouse so that the elbow's down by your shoulder and you're at a 90-degree bend or slightly less at the elbow. And so the reason for this is if you're having to work too high on a workstation, again, you're going to start pulling up your shoulders, and that's going to create tension in the neck and in the shoulder. If you're reaching too far out, again, that's also going to get you off your base of support. And if you're looking at a monitor that's too low, again, that's going to get your head off the base of support. So workplace stations are a huge part. I spend a lot of time with this with my clients, customizing their workstation, looking at how they're organizing themselves. And there's a number of videos that I have in terms of finding better support sitting and learning to use your sit bones as a base of support. So you can reference those videos in the library. All right, to wrap up, a few other common things that people do. One is a lack of movement. So simply, if you're just not moving very much and you're staying in the same position, maybe you're spending a lot of time at your workstation or in front of a TV, or you're sitting on long drives. Of course, if you're not moving your body, it's the use it or lose it principle. So getting up, having more frequent breaks, challenging your body to move in more variety of ways will help with reducing the likelihood of increasing tension and discomfort over time. On the opposite end of that is overuse. So either not enough or too much can create problems, right? So if you're doing the same repetitive movement over and over again, like looking over your shoulder constantly, or you're working on multiple monitors and you just have your head turned to one direction the majority of the time, that's going to possibly create an overuse where you're overusing particular muscles in the neck and it's not in a balanced way. So lack of movement, too much movement. The last thing I wanted to address is sleeping, because a lot of clients will come in and say, you know, I was feeling fine all day and then I went home, I went to bed, and the next morning I woke up and I had a kink in my neck. One of the major factors, again, is just your sense of organization support while you're sleeping. If you're sleeping on your side, you can imagine if my arm were my body and my hand is my head, you want the head organized so that it's in line with the rest of the spine. If your head's tipped up too much because you have a really thick pillow, that could create issues. Or if you have too narrow of a pillow and your head is crinked down, that could also be an issue. So trying to get your head level with the rest of your spine. Sometimes it's helpful for some people, particularly if they have shoulder discomfort too. You can fold up a thin blanket and put a little extra support. So you're lying with the pillow, a thin blanket in between, so you create a little gap for your shoulder to rest in. That may also be beneficial. And the same thing applies with sleeping on your back. If you're a back sleeper and you have a really thick pillow and it's pushing you into too much flexion, or you're sleeping without a pillow and you're falling into extension, that could be an issue as well. So looking at how you can maximize the support and keeping the pieces all congruent so that there's not too much side bend or flexion extension in the neck while you sleep. Here's the wrap up of the take homes that you can take away from this. Number one, finding a way to have clear skeletal support so the legs, the pelvis, the rib cage, the shoulders, and the head are all stacked on top of each other. Anytime that you deviate from that, you're going to create tension in your system, and if you stay in that position for too long, that will create problems. So clear skeletal support. The next thing is movement. You got to get up and move. Our bodies are meant to move. We evolved moving. We don't move as much as we used to, and that's why a lot of people develop pain. Get up, move frequently, move in a variety of different ways, and move within a comfortable range of motion. Don't repeatedly take yourself into a movement that is painful. If you have neck pain and you keep turning to the point of pain, you're just hammering in that neurological connection to send a pain signal to that spot. So you want to move within pain-free ranges of motion, and move frequently and move in lots of different varieties to increase your tolerance to movement, so eventually you can start moving in greater ranges of motion. In addition to movement, thinking about all the different pieces. Remembering to not just move from your neck, but start to move through the legs, through the pelvis, through the rest of the spine, so that the neck isn't responsible for all the movement. All right, that's a wrap for today. Please leave in the comments which strategy you think is going to help you the most. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. Please hit the like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.